Right. Good evening. Good evening, folks. I am sat here wondering why no one's answered. I actually said hello, folks, ages ago, and I'm sat here going, why is the blue button not appearing? So in our console, it says, go live. I'm like, and the image isn't coming, but OBS says it's working.
Now we're actually live.
Now we are live.
I could be heard, but
excellent. Hopefully, yeah. I broke the internet. I hope it's all settled back down now. All good.
Okay, I can be heard. I can hear myself. Hello, Roderick. Hello, Mikey. Mikey, how are you?
Very good. Very energetic this evening. I hope you're all having a wonderful evening, morning, or afternoon.
Yep. I'm a little jittery and headachy at the same time, so I want to bounce around, but it hurts me.
So, do you have a different shirt on from when we spoke earlier?
No.
I do. And I seem to have matched you. So
excellent.
I have pattern.
Hello, Jenny. Hello, BitGamey. BitGamey's been a while.
Hey, and Jenny's here. That's good because we're going to be talking about hardware. So I've been working on a
seamless.
Yeah, I know. Segue.
I've been talking about King Dracula, but Mikey's been talking about hardware.
They could go together very well. So yes, it's Jenny. In fact, is the person who sparked off me taking my computer apart and breaking some stuff. Thanks for that. 100% my fault. But it's been a lot of fun, and I've been putting together a YouTube video, and it's like 3 or 4 weeks in the making now. And I'm like, why did I record 4.5 hours? One thing I will say though is that recording black hardware, even with good lighting, is incredibly difficult. Even after a clean
every speck of dust is going to show.
Yeah, I'm like, my case is still
it's
dirty.
like recording cooking, because kitchens are
filthy,
traditionally very badly lit. Like you're against the corner with one crappy lamp over you, and every piece of grease shows. Hello, Mindstammer. So yeah, you have some things to talk about hardware.
Yes. Well, I want to get it out into kind of this form, and then when the video eventually drops, yay, we get a more concise form, a more in-depth form. And obviously, if any of you guys have any questions as we go through, do shout out. I think that's really important. I've seen quite a few videos on, especially Blender, focused about hardware come out in recent times, but they're all sponsored. Yeah. And, you've always got to take sponsored content with a pinch of salt.
Hi, Munster.
Hey!
Munster.
Great to have some people on board today. Yeah. So as I say, if you've got any questions about hardware, do you want to start with hardware and then we'll go on to Godot 5?
Godot 5?
3.5 after
Mikey's got DeLorean, everybody.
Too much
Is
coffee.
there still a planet when Godot 5 comes out?
Too much caffeine.
Yeah. Godot 3.5 did just officially release, and it's got some very nice back ports from Godot 4, which we can't talk about.
Awesome.
Mikey and I have just been listening to music because I've had Christmas music stuck in my head all day, so I tried to distract myself by sharing some music I've found recently to Mikey. But that's probably not suitable for the stream.
Yeah. I want to keep it light with the hardware as well, because it's very easy for me to go really, really in depth, and I don't know how technical our audience is, so I'll be skimming the surface. And what's it called when you tell lies to children? Not that our audience is a child, but a child. You all make up one child.
I mean, the phrase I learned was lies to children, but for those of you who don't know it, this is something that Pratchett et al. Came up with in Science of the Discworld, which is, so in Buddhism, it's called skillful means, higher. But it's the idea that until you have a certain level of expertise, you won't grasp the actuality of something. So you don't teach someone quantum mechanics straight away. You teach them classical physics.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You don't teach someone calculus until they've got, subtraction. And it's not that you're withholding information. It's they have to think that they've grasped it before you pull the rug out and show them there's a whole other part they don't know.
But wait, there's more. Roderick, lovely. Yeah, enough caffeine and you can see the future. You go so quick you can see the back of your own head.
I managed to typo 5D. It would have been funny with 5D, but I wrote 4D.
Never mind. So yeah. So it basically all started with Jenny actually looking for new hardware for a computer, and I thought, you know what, it'd be a great. I need to clean my computer. Earlier on in the year, I cleaned out all the children's computers, and I actually ran out of time. I put a weekend aside to do it, got those all sorted, and they were filthy. Now, fortunately, my office, even though it's got a carpet and the computer sits on the carpet, which is usually a big no-no, the office has me sit in it and go. It's not a high traffic area. And now that I've got like the windows all shut and everything, I'm not getting a load of dust into the room. But yeah, in general, you shouldn't really put a computer on the
Cat
floor.
hair.
Yeah, especially if you've got pets. That. So when I'm planning on getting a Labrador at some point in the near future. Yeah, it's going to have to go up. Otherwise, it'll try and sit on top of it. That's what
Are you going
dogs
to call
do.
it Is Dog?
Is dog. Oh, I'm going to put that forward.
For those of you who don't know, I've got Is Cat and Caboodle, so I just think if I've got Is Cat, he should have Is Dog.
How do you say Jenny like Forrest Gump? Maybe we don't want to know that. I don't know. So yes. So I started cleaning out my computer and I put it all back together and I actually made a couple of discoveries. So I'm a big fan of not having liquid cooling. So there's two ways of cooling a computer. You can have a big lump of metal on top and blow a fan over it, air cooling, or you can have a big lump of metal on top and flow water through it, and that's liquid cooling. And you get sort of these intermediate things that are called AIOs or all-in-ones. So you don't have to worry about the faff of having a reservoir and doing your own piping and everything, which to me sounds like a real nuisance. And the only reason I think I've never done it is because the computer I work with is my work computer. If I spill water over it, I'm going to be pretty grumpy. And I'm also not going to be able to talk to you fine guys. So, and towards the end of this whole thing, I've actually thought, well, perhaps I do want some liquid cooling, because it actually does one thing that I hadn't thought about, which is it frees up a lot more space around, because I've got a really beefy cooler. In fact, if I have a moment, I think I can pull one out and go, it's like the size of my head. It's ridiculous, but it's really, really good up until the point where I don't have any space. But I also want to branch out, not just Blender focused, but also game dev in general, because I see a lot of people talking about hardware and not getting it. It sounds to me more like people are scared of starting and finding excuses as to why they can't start, rather than actually just starting and seeing what the limitations of their hardware are. And I've been on multiple forums, and whether it's Blender artists or Facebook groups, and there are plenty of Facebook groups out there. And I think a lot of people mean well when they try and give people advice and information, but some of it comes from, unfortunately, ignorance. They're saying something and repeating it without knowing the reason why that thing is right or wrong. And you can end up spending thousands of dollars or pounds on things
It's like that
that you don't
old
need.
adage, isn't it? Which is a little knowledge is a dangerous thing.
Oh, very
You
much
know
so.
just enough to make a huge mistake.
And I've done it as well.
Yeah, I have too. I mean, remember my memory buying woes 2 years back.
Do you need help, Jan? No, I'm fine.
Like, how hard can it be? I'm going to buy some RAM. 4 purchases later. Mikey's like, you can put one of them through the company.
Yeah,
all the others are your fault. Yeah, no, they are.
Server RAM and then laptop RAM and then the wrong laptop RAM and something else. Yeah, you got there in the end.
I did.
So yeah, when it comes to getting started with game dev, you generally do need a bit of a beefy system, but you certainly don't need a really high-end system. Now, it's really confusing as well, because Intel over the last 12 years have called their processors i3, i5, and i7, and recently we've had i9. And then you've got the AMD side, which weren't worth having for a while, and now they're really good, and they're pretty much equal these days with modern hardware. But not everybody is going to buy modern hardware. That you can get some great deals of last gen hardware and still have a fantastic
When you said last
time.
gen, that's
Perfect timing. Yes, so it can be quite challenging to pick the parts that you need. But in general, if you focus on the type of component, then you can start picking things out. So, like if you've got your CPU, which is the general brain of the computer, sometimes a program that you're using is going to benefit from that, and other times it's not going to benefit as much. So you've got this, you can have a few cores or many cores, and sometimes a program can take advantage of, my computer's got 16 cores and 32 threads, which means it can process 32 things at the same time. Now, my laptop over there's got 6 cores and 12 threads, and that's called hyperthreading. When you've got 2 like that, and I think AMD called it something else, but it like doubles up on what the processor power can possibly be. But that's not. It's not always about the number of cores or the amount of gigahertz a chip has, and it can be really, really confusing to anybody looking at hardware. What do I actually need? And it varies as well. So taking Blender as an example, a lot of things in Blender are single threaded. So those 16 cores are a real waste, even
Hmm.
if you're doing physics simulations. But if it comes to doing some things that aren't, like rendering, if I fill up the amount of RAM on my graphics card, I've got lots more RAM on my computer that I can use instead. And therefore, I can use the CPU to render out, and then it will use all of those cores. Jenny's got wasn't impressed with DDR5 RAM right now. It's brand new. That's the thing with brand new technology. You run the risk of it being very expensive and not giving you much of a performance improvement. And
Yeah.
generally, when it comes to DDR5, 4, 3, it really doesn't matter how fast that memory is. It does in certain circumstances when you've loaded the stuff into memory, but the amount often matters more, especially with game dev or Blender stuff in general. So another one with RAM's probably the next thing, and a
Hmm.
lot of I've seen a lot of cheaper systems running with 4 GB of RAM, and the problem with 4 GB of RAM is Windows wants 4 when you start. And I'm gonna of course talk about Windows here. Linux is far more optimized, but it still requires RAM to run the GUI and everything. Really, 4 is too small to do game dev with. I would recommend 16 as a baseline for anybody entering game dev or Blender stuff. It gives
I
you
mean,
lots
I
of
would
room.
jump in quickly
Yep.
and say that as of 3.5, there is an Android version of Godot, which, if you're running a Chromebook, might actually be worthwhile.
Oh, interesting. So you can
Because
actually.
they put in Android editor specifically for people who are running tablets and Chromebooks
Oh,
because they
wow.
don't have computers.
Now I'm of course. It's very difficult because you all come from your own position when you start talking about what
Yeah.
hardware someone needs, and I'm going to give a load of generic advice here. And if you're working on 2D stuff, then you don't need a high end graphics card at all.
Well, I mean, it depends on what kind of 2D stuff and even what kind of 3D stuff. Like Call of Duty is not the same as Human Fall Flat, is not the same as Pong.
Yeah, 100%. Well, take 2D. If you were creating a 2D game, then you could get away with integrated graphics. You wouldn't need a high-end graphics card to run that. There would be, and this is where it starts getting in depth, because if you started doing shaders, so you've got a 2D game, but it's using a lot of the shader technology that's on the graphics cards, then suddenly having a decent graphics card can have an impact on frame rate. Yes, Roderick, you're quite right there. In fact, during the video, I mentioned the fact that I'm actually running Windows at the moment, and let's have a look. And I tab out the Task Manager, and I'll do it right now. I'll tab out to Task Manager, and I'm currently using 14.6 gigabytes, and I genuinely don't have much open. I've got OBS open, so you guys can see me. I have got Chrome open. I've got 3 tabs. So I'm not actually, you know, really going for it. But Windows and all operating systems will utilize the RAM you give them up to a certain
Mm.
point. I've the other day it was up at 20 and I had a video editor open. So it does depend on what you do. I'm the sort of
I'm
person.
using 4 gig of RAM, but then again, I'm not streaming.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm talking to you, but I'm not, running OBS and doing all the other stuff.
Yeah. Obviously, depending on what hardware you've got plugged into your computer, that'll chew up some memory as well. So I've got like my audio interface and things like that. I don't know how much memory those things chew up. If I was to look at my thing here, OBS Studio at the moment is consuming 1.2 gigs, and Edge is consuming another gig. So you can see those things very quickly can add up. If
I
you
didn't know people used Edge.
Hmm?
Didn't know
Well,
people
Edge
used
Edge
Edge.
is now based upon Chrome, so it's good again. And
But what about Bing?
Bong, bing, bing. No, the original Bing horrible, but it can be interesting looking at search results. Earlier on, I was trying to look for
Mm.
something, and I started off, and I was like, why are these search results rubbish? Oh, I'm using Bing. So in the Bing search engine, I searched for Google like everybody does, clicked on the Google link, and then searched the thing that I wanted to search.
I think that might actually be Bing's marketing material. Why are these search results rubbish? Oh, it's Bing.
Sometimes they're good, specifically for Microsoft stuff, but other times they're really, really rubbish.
I mean, I have my own problems with Google, but not really relevant right now. One thing I will point out as well is if you're doing game dev, you want a machine that is slightly more powerful than your average user because your game, especially if you're running something like Godot, which doesn't compile in the same way that something like Unity or Unreal does,
Mm.
right? You just run it. And then afterwards, you compile it down to an executable. That executable is going to be more efficient.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
So
always
you're
the
going
case.
to use less resources to run that. But while developing it, especially if you've got the editor on one screen and a 3D scene there, and then you're running the same 3D scene over here, you're going to need a little bit more oomph.
Yeah. And
That's a technical term.
if you wanted to stream what you were doing or record what you're doing, you're going to need a slightly more powerful computer on top of that. There are some gotchas as well. So I'm a big fan of the NVENC encoding that's present on all GeForce cards from the 20 series and up. It's much better than using your CPU. However, if I'm actually using optics within Blender and a few other things at the same time, if I'm pushing the graphics card, then it doesn't encode so well. So it's great if you're recording a game, it'll impact the performance a little, but it's no good if you're trying to do other things with your computer as well. Godot 5 doesn't use memory. It runs on good wishes and happy thoughts. Nice.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I was speaking to somebody who has just spent a whole bunch of money upgrading like a 10-year-old machine to be a modern games machine.
Yeah.
And she came to the conclusion she doesn't need an i7 because she's not streaming. She's
Yep.
not doing any video work. So why spend the extra money?
It also depends on what sort of and whether or not you're playing games. The thing is, a games computer, a computer you buy to play games on, is often a very good game development computer and often a good
Mm.
Blender computer because of the hardware overlaps, or a good video editing computer. Now that there is a point at which you can start bottlenecking your computer, where you've got a, let's say
Which
you,
happens to me all the time when I'm recording.
yes. So if your CPU can't deliver the information to your graphics card quickly enough, then the CPU is bottlenecking the system, and the graphics card can't reach its full potential. But you can have it the other way around as well, where the bottleneck is the graphics card, and so it's difficult to balance those things out. And generally, it's good to have a balanced system. But there are some instances where having an i3, so a really low end CPU, and a 3090, everybody would say well, that's a stupid combination. And I would agree until you then learn that all they do on that computer is render.
Yeah.
Then you spec the
Todal
computer really well.
also points out that having a lower spec system for optimization and visual setting tests. Yes, you want to test your game on as many systems as you can.
Yes. Now, sometimes you have the option of either virtualization, or you can go into your BIOS and start tinkering with your computer, and then you can you say I've got 16 cores. Well, I can actually go into my BIOS and say, actually, you've now only got 2 cores. Or if you run some sort of virtualization setup, you can actually just spec the computer as you want. And that has now been opened up with NVIDIA cards. I don't know about AMD, but it's certainly opened up with NVIDIA cards where you can slice your graphics card up inside virtualization software, which does in itself have a performance hit, but it also allows you to scale a system and see how it performs at different settings.
It's a good question from Jenny here. Is there a good rule of how to match up a CPU and a GPU to get a balanced system?
I'm going to say,
I mean, I just want to make sure they weigh the same.
that won't work. Not with today's stuff. In truth, no, because the balance will depend on what you're trying to do. So if you want a really good gaming machine, you probably don't need any more than an i5 or a 5600X on the AMD side. and you'd pair that with any graphics card and it probably perform really well. Now, that's not to say that you couldn't eke out even more performance from a graphics card, um, from having a faster CPU, but you start to approach diminishing returns, at which point you aren't balanced anymore. And the other thing I think a lot of people forget about when it comes to gaming specifically is that if your monitor is a 60 hertz monitor, there is a small advantage to having like 300 frames per second, but you'll just see a ton of tearing across your screen with most technologies, which is just horrible. It
Yep.
is. Um, Speaking of graphics cards, this is one that gets thrown around a lot, and people are like, "Oh yeah, you should just get the best one you can afford," which is very true. You know, you don't want to overstretch and spec things beyond what you would need. But there are also things to remember as you're specking up. So at the moment, I would say that Nvidia would be the graphics card to go for production work. So if you're producing games, or you're doing graphics work, I would recommend having an Nvidia card. They are just better supported and more stable for the job. Now, there are some benefits to the AMD side, like larger frame buffers, i.e., the RAM on the graphics card, the VRAM. But the problem with that is that's no good if you also then have a much slower experience. So I think they're catching up with things, but at the moment, I'd definitely spec an NVIDIA card. So
I'm having to take off my headphones. Let me know if you get echoes.
there was a little bit of echo, but I think it's cancelled out now really well. So with graphics cards, the speed of the graphics card kind of matters, but so does the amount of RAM that it has on it. And that's usually called GDDR, and then it has a number after it. And the number doesn't really matter. It's really just linked to the generation of graphics card. We're currently at GDDR 6 in the 30 series graphics cards, or 6X with the high end ones. But that frame buffer, let's say we're just in Blender for the moment, that frame buffer will allow you to render a certain amount of stuff on the screen. Whether or not you've got textures in there, the geometry, and everything else, that all has to be loaded into the graphics card for it to calculate what the scene is going to look like. The downside of not having enough is Blender doesn't crash anymore. It just takes a really long time because it'll start swapping things off and back on the graphics card. So you can actually have a scene that ends up taking a long time to render because you don't have enough RAM. And the same is true when it comes to game development. If you don't have enough RAM, you're going to constantly have it swapping in and out textures, and just your game will end up either stuttering or you won't be able to perform in the editor particularly well. So going back to Jan's point earlier about having something that's overspec'd, so for instance, a 3080 Ti has 12 gigs of RAM and a 3090 has 24. If you have any of those cards and your target system is anything with 8 gigs or lower, then you know that you've got the space to have unoptimized textures and unoptimized models within your scene. And that is actually quite critical during the game development process once you're serious at it. I will add that in, because if you're doing it as a business, then it's worthwhile specking up your hardware. If you're doing it as a hobby, don't see it as something that you need to go out and do and get the high-end hardware. Don't do that until you know that you need it. So one of the things that Jan and I often bounce off of with when it comes to actually teaching game development is unoptimized models. During the stage, that's what you want. You don't want optimized models because you've spent hours making those things, rather than just getting on with the game and seeing if things work and then coming back later and going, right. Mag Racer was a great example of where one of our crafts had like 500,000 polygons. Godot handled it absolutely fine, but having 12 of them on the screen at once caused a tiny bit of stuttering from every now and then. So once we were happy with the overall shape of the craft and we were happy with how it was handling during the game, then I came back and lowered it down to, I think it was about 8,000 to 10,000 polygons in
It was
total.
a massive reduction.
Massive
And
reduction.
we did the same with the textures. They went from
Like-
huge amounts of memory to tiny.
And doing that type of optimization is something you do towards the end. You don't want to do it at the beginning, otherwise you're spending all of your time optimizing rather than getting the game.
A video came up on my YouTube
done.
last week, and it was called "Why All Video Tutorials on Game Development Are Lying to You." And the guy's opening statement was, "They're not teaching you optimization. You need to know that before you do anything else." And I just turned it off, because no, optimization is important.
Yep.
But you don't do it at the beginning.
I think that's a fool's errand if you start optimizing right at the very beginning. If you're creating an asset in Blender and you don't know quite, you're still developing the style for the game that you're working on, or even the style for just the scene you're working on. Let's say you're working on a very simple barrel, so you make the barrel, and you could spend 10 minutes. Okay, cylinder, bend it in a little at the top, put some rings around it, inset the top and bottom. Okay, brilliant. We're done. Next model. And you can get through maybe 20 or 30 models in that working day. And you've got kind of a scene, you can move things around, and then you can start to improve the look afterwards. However, or I could, for instance, I could have handed those off to Jan. He said, "Oh, they're awesome. Can I have 4 of these instead of those set of models
Hmm.
there?" Or I could have spent that time modeling a hyper realistic barrel with 4K textures everywhere, and Jan's going, "What you got, Mike?" And I went, "I got a barrel,
I can't put these in my game.
but it's optimized. But it's optimized."
Yeah.
So you can. I mean, there is a balance. You shouldn't deliberately do things that are going to cause you problems.
You should have best practices,
Yeah,
right? You shouldn't be bringing in poly counts that are too high. You shouldn't be
yeah.
writing code that's obnoxious and not human readable and too slow and yada yada yada.
Hmm.
But at the beginning of the process, optimization is not your focus. At the beginning of the process, your focus is creating the system.
Yeah, you need a minimum viable product. Does the game play well? And ultimately, when we started with the action RPG, we were just moving a capsule around the level. That there wasn't a character at any point. In fact, there wasn't really a level. It was like how's the movement feel? Okay, that's good. Okay, we need to get some animations in because once you got to the point where you've got a character, we've got the character sliding around the level. Always looks funny. Obviously, it doesn't look right, doesn't feel right. Then you got the player running around, and you're like, well, we need to tweak the animations at this point. And once you start adding on the other layers that people often forget about when it comes to game development, it's not just about modeling something, sticking it in a game, and coding it. That's like the real basics. After that, when you say, "Oh, okay, we need some animations," so you rig the model, you animate it, you go, "Well, this is starting to poke through. Our character's running, and their sword keeps chopping their leg off." Again, this is an optimization step you probably want to miss at this point, because if later on, literally a few days later in the process, oh, we're going to change the sword type. You change that
Yeah, or
sword
we're
type,
going to
it's
cut
no
the
longer,
run.
yeah. Or you do something like that. You don't need to optimize your game. Otherwise, you end up in this cyclic hell, essentially, of just working
I mean,
on a
the other way
few
people
things.
have tried to solve that, and I think the biggest example of this
Yeah.
is Deus Ex, like the remake, um, where they planned out the entire game before they wrote any code,
Yeah.
which meant that they couldn't adapt. And that could be a problem, right?
Yeah.
Like there are parts of that game that maybe could have been better if there'd been a lot more fluid
Yeah.
in the development
I mean,
process.
I have that particular issue when writing a course. So I will generally write down the curriculum, what the end goal is at this point in the course, what the end goal is for the entire course, and then you start planning out the lectures. You find the final stages. So your midpoint, you're going to make this, and then you're going to do that with it, and then you start the process of teaching it. And suddenly you find that, oh, actually, if we take this path rather than
Yeah,
that
I do
path,
that all
it's
the
a
time.
much better learning journey. So I think this applies to anything creative. That trying to go to a final product quickly is it can be effective if you're lucky, or if you're very experienced. And I think this is something key to put out there. If you were an experienced artist, you could pretty much start. I remember my friend Andy from school. He was a phenomenal artist, and so was his brother. And watching them like draw an elephant, they would just start drawing the elephant. I mean,
Mm.
their experience, they've done it time and time again. And when I say elephant, it was like a photo by the time it was finished with their shading and everything. But they didn't have to do the classic owl. Draw one circle, draw another circle, draw the owl. Um, but those outline shapes, those blocks of detail that you slowly iterate towards a final product, enable you to take that step by step approach, and that, as you were alluding to with Deus Ex, there allow you to make course corrections, which are really important when you're developing a game, because games are big, complex systems of lots of simple setups. So
And once again, I will point people to H Bomber Guy's ridiculous 3.5 hour
that's a good one.
video on Deus Ex is fine, where they actually compare the remake with some of the decisions that Warren Spector and co made, where they ended up using, I think it was something like 15% of the design document that they'd originally written, and just threw the rest away. Because about a month before launch, they were like, this game isn't fun.
How do we make it fun?
Let's fix it.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, a game is going to give the player some sort of experience. Now, sometimes, I mean, take something like Factorio, for example. I think that's an absolutely wonderful game, or Satisfactory if you're into the 3D version of it. Then, but it's also a great spreadsheet manager, and some people find a lot of fun optimizing a game. I don't find that sort of. I find it fulfilling if I discover something, but I'm never gonna go to a spreadsheet and open up a spreadsheet in order to start playing a game.
I think the one that really got me with that was Oxygen Not Included.
Oh yeah,
which is lovely, and I got it, and it's great. And I don't enjoy it.
No,
it's not fun for me because it isn't a cute little cartoony game of explore and build and hijinks. It's a build and optimization game with cute, adorable graphics.
Yeah,
like I completely misunderstood the feeling that they were going for.
Yeah,
and actually, what they're going for just doesn't work with the way I play and the way I enjoy it and the way I think. I am not bad mouthing the game at all. The game is phenomenal. It's just not my game. I'm not sorry I bought it, but who was I wrong?
Well, I figured out, like in Minecraft when I was playing that, there's actually optimizations you can do within there, because like a piece of coal can do 8 items or something along those lines, and then you could a block of coal can do 64 items. Or I can't remember if those are the exact things, and those were helpful optimizations, and you didn't have to really think about it. But you knew that if you put a block of coal in and a piece of meat, you were wasting the block of coal.
Yeah.
So little things like that help you along with the game. But things like Factorio require a lot of optimization. And I didn't get it half right, and then your whole setup just shuts down because you didn't calculate the right thing. Oh. But I do enjoy the game still. I enjoy, for the sake of just exploring and playing. But I'd never turn to a spreadsheet to do that.
But it's very common when you're building a game, and it's happened when we're building games for courses, where we're getting to a point where it's quite stable and all the rest of it, and we realize this isn't the experience we're going for. We need to change something.
Yeah.
We've accidentally built the wrong kind of game. I mean, I can't remember which game it was where all the controls were not what you'd expect.
Yeah.
And so it's one that you and I have played together, but I can't remember what it was. But it's things like the inventory's on the wrong key and stuff like that. And it just ruins the experience of the game. The game becomes a lot more sort of a memory game than it is a fast action.
Yes, I remember I had a bad experience with not the forest, with I keep forgetting what it's called, the Long Dark, because the control system wasn't typical. And it turns out that you should probably play it with a controller. It feels like someone's ported it without understanding how PC games typically have their keyboard laid out. It threw me the first time that I think it's Call of Duty. Correct me if I'm wrong, chat, but don't they use the F key to use stuff? And for me, it's always been the
F key to pay respects.
Yes, I was waiting for that.
People keep doing that.
But I
haven't played Call of Duty ever, so
yeah. Well, I'm so used to E being the use key from like Half-Life days, and I'm not saying that paradigm shouldn't change over time. Otherwise, we won't be using a mouse to aim anymore. We go back to Doom 2 and try and strafe using the Alt
before
key.
that, use the cursor keys and control for fire.
Yeah, we've definitely moved on. But if you move too far away from what your users are used to, then you start to have you have a problem. You're going to have to explain things that otherwise you wouldn't have to explain. So we drifted a little bit off the topic of hardware.
I mean, I quite like these drifts.
I'm just like, this isn't hardware. But yeah, does anybody have any questions on hardware as we've gone through? So you've got the main parts of the computer that I would say are your CPU, which is the general thinking part of the computer, your RAM. Um, so going back to CPU for a second, a modern CPU with at least 6 cores is going to be a good starting point. If you go up from there, you're going to start to get more and more expensive hardware. RAM starts at 16 gigs if you're serious about game development or anything in Blender or video editing. All of those sorts of things benefit from more RAM. Up to a point, you can get too much. I've got 64 gigs in my system, and I have used it all plenty of times, and I wish I got 128. Can't afford 128 because I need to pull out the sticks I've got to put the new stuff in. I'm like, I'm going to waste all that RAM. But yeah, it turns out that if you do particle simulations or anything that requires a lot of movement of data,
Mm.
then a lot of RAM definitely helps. Now, on from that graphics card, mid-tier graphics cards are absolutely fine for doing
Yeah,
most
we've sort of
things.
gone beyond the point where you have to change your graphics card every year.
Yeah,
That was the case throughout the early 2000s, but
well, it's like every 2 years is the cadence now, and if you get a pretty high end card, you can usually keep it for several years. But that precludes the ability to be able to use the new stuff that comes out. So if you
yeah, I mean that's the only difference. I'm still rocking the 1060 and it's fine. I
yeah,
can't do some of the new RTX stuff. Don't really care, but
I found it's made very little difference. What it has made with is that bit of technology being utilized with optics in Blender and being super quick to be able to render something out like 7-8 times quicker. And I can't test anymore. I used to have a 1080, and they actually enabled optics for the 9, 10, 20, and 30 series. And they say it's a lot quicker, but my experience of optics before I swapped out to a 30 series card was that it took the same time, but you needed less samples. So at that point, it was just like, well, you're balancing things together. I don't know if it's much faster now because that's before Cycles X became much more developed. But now we've got these new technologies. I mean, I don't think there's going to be anything super duper from the 40 series, so there won't be any compelling reason to upgrade to an even faster card. But one of the things that I really wish I knew about or thought about, because obviously these things are super apparent once you realize them. If you have high end hardware, it generates a lot of heat.
yes.
And the predictions are that the new CPUs that are coming out and the new GPUs towards the end of the year are going to be even more power hungry. So if you my total system will put out about 600 watts by itself, plus maybe a couple hundred watts for the other hardware and lighting around. So I'm effectively in the corner of a room with an 800-watt heater.
Hmm.
That can get uncomfortable if you're in an environment where you cannot cool it down. Maybe you don't have air conditioning. Maybe the country you live in is already at like 35 degrees during the day. We've had, with the recent heat waves and everything, it's become very apparent that some people are used to a lot of
And even
heat.
if you can run air conditioning, like if you're trying to do recording and sound work,
That
you
can,
have to turn the AC off.
yeah, and then you start boiling yourself. So
Yep.
that's one of the things that I wish I'd paid more attention to. Is the fact that yes, it's great having high end hardware, except when you start cooking yourself.
And
And
even then, the high end graphics card and the high end RAM, I would say, matters for certain types of experience in games more than others. Like if you are looking
Mhm.
for incredible high fidelity on a top end flight simulator,
Yeah.
I can see the argument for going all in.
Yeah,
Right?
it also helps with VR experiences, being able to
VR is a
run
great example.
with a yeah.
Anything where you're looking for that very big cinematic experience. That's not typically what I'm looking for. In fact, I will always turn off motion blur, which I mentioned because the only reason motion blur exists is to simulate a movie camera.
I hate
Like the
motion
human
blur with
eye
a
doesn't
passion.
work like that, but we expect action scenes to have blur, so we
Yeah.
put it in.
There are two things in games, unless they are actually a cinematic game, I'll turn off. One is motion blur, and one is depth of field. And there are
Oh
quite
yeah.
a few games at the moment. I'm like, yeah, but where my cursor isn't what I'm necessarily looking at. Why is everything blurry? If I wanted a blurry thing, I
I mean, I
want.
get that from my glasses. I need to get new glasses.
One final thing on hardware, then, and
Oh yeah, we're still talking about that.
well, I was just leading on to not only is the heat there, but In certain parts of the world at the moment, I know that's not the case in oil producing nations like Canada and the States a lot of the time, but in a lot of the world at the moment, electricity is incredibly expensive.
Yep.
And I made a a napkin calculation, roughly how much when the Mac Studio came out. I'll preface it with that. How much money would I save if I just swapped my computer, sat down there, and just used the brand new Mac Studio? Bearing in mind they're like £2,000 plus, which is a good chunk of money. I would save approximately £400 to £500 at current electricity prices by switching over, just on a raw calculation. And you're like, wow, that's a huge decision, and it essentially pays for itself in 4 years, and that's assuming that electricity prices don't go up, which they're predicted to do again.
Which we know
So
they're going to in 2 months. Like,
yes, they've already said it's going up. Now it's one of those things that you don't really think about when buying a computer, but if you buy high end hardware, it comes with expensive heat because or expensive running, sometimes significantly more, because you often end up pulling far more power for the small increment gain that you're getting
mm,
over something a little less. But not only that, you end up with, as I say, the cost of running the thing and the potential of failure due to heat. Now, often that's not a problem, but if you have high end hardware, you do need to maintain it. You need to make sure that the fans are clear and that
oh
you
yeah, you
dust
definitely don't want a
things.
cookie machine.
Most computers have sort of trip. So,
Mm,
I'm too hot, I'm going to turn off. However, that wouldn't save your computer during a peak load where suddenly it calls, oh, what 300 watts now. It heats up rapidly and then kills itself before it has a chance to throttle down. That doesn't happen that often, but if you've got a computer caked in dust, it's more likely to happen. And I've
well,
even,
plus every like sudden emergency shutdown like that risks data. Like you
yes,
risk corrupting a hard drive, possibly even RAM. I think I don't know if that's still the case, but like you can
oh yeah,
do actual
you'd
physical
lose
damage.
everything. I don't think you'd damage anything with a sudden power loss, but you could do. Sudden power losses
I
do
mean, I
cause
know
spikes.
um, when my mother first started using a computer, she was bored of the shutdown that Windows was doing. This is back in the Windows 95
Did she
days.
flick the switch on the wall or
She
something?
flicked the switch
Yeah.
and it wiped her registry.
Yep. I mean, Windows was incredibly fragile back in the day. So,
Yep.
I mean, I think you can get away with a lot more
It's a lot more
nowadays.
stable than it
Yeah.
was, but even so, like over time, you're going to cause damage if that keeps happening.
Yeah. I mean, if you're saving out a file, so recording a video like we're doing right now, when I press stop recording, it still takes a few seconds to finish, take the data from RAM and store it on the hard drive. And having a fast system helps with that sort of thing. But essentially, if you lose power at any point, you're going to lose data at some point.
Mm.
And I've had computers. I had a laptop once that used to shut down if you managed to max out both the CPU and the GPU at the same time. It turns out it wasn't overheating. That the Dell, in their infinite wisdom, didn't actually spec it with enough power delivery. That if you
Yeah.
did those two things, it just went, I don't have the power. Bye. It would just go off. Dreadful machine.
Yep. I don't see any more questions
No.
since Jenny's balancing things. But
Hey, hi,
nice one,
BB.
Mikey. Hey, baby.
So yes, that pretty much wraps up the hardware side of things. It can be difficult, and if you have any questions, of course, I'm always happy to help. Hop over to our Discord, and I'll
Hop on over into
into play.
Discord.
Yes, I will just post the link to the Discord in our chat, and we can
Yep.
move on to Godot
So my talk about Godot
3.5.
3.5 is going to be a lot less involved, mostly because a lot of the things that are now new in 3.5, and there's a lot of new stuff in 3.5 that is very cool, is backported from 4. And so we've kind of already looked at some of it before, but
Mhm.
there's some things I'm really interested about. So if you've got a little bit of time, you should pick it up. I'm not using it at the moment for battle tactics. Sorry, my brain went for a minute there because I'm waiting for the new version of Godot Steam. But there's stuff in there that will be very helpful, and one of them is Godot 3.5 is using Godot 4's navigation system. So
Nice.
previously, navigation in Godot required you draw or have a navigation mesh, and then it will use pathfinding within that navigation method. You could tell it to use round corners or not use round corners, and how big the agent has to be, and so on, which is great, but you can't really do it at runtime, which is a real problem if you've got any kind of changing level or obstacles or levels drawn at runtime. Like it's a real issue. And there's little workarounds you can try and do, but usually you just end up having to write your own thing or use A star. The new system, and I haven't played with this extensively in 3.5, but in 4, is you have a navigation agent. And that's now your NPC. And it knows it can move at this speed and it's this size.
Yeah.
And if it is within a navigation zone and it can connect to its destination, it will try and go there, and it will try and avoid anything you mark as an obstacle. And these navigation zones don't have to be one zone; they can be touching, so you can have pieces of the level moving.
Oh, that's
and
cool.
You can add and remove obstacles as you go, right? Or you could say, okay, I'm going to remove this bit, rebake the level. Now that's a little time consuming, but you can do that. So there's a lot of really cool stuff you can do there. And I think I'm going to try and put a video together on that in the next few days. We shall see how I go. I'm really happy with the new navigation system. I want to get that into battle tactics. I want to get that into, well, it'll be in the Godot 4 action RPG and the stuff for the new Godot 4 basic to intermediate course that we haven't announced the name of yet, because we don't have that web page.
I don't know if I bought it.
Rediscovering Godot, not the name. Although it would be a good name.
Yes.
I really enjoy the new navigation system. It's fun to see NPCs sort of, or even your player character, if you click to moving and moving out of the way. I have done a quick video on that in Godot 4.
Yeah.
And a little while back. It's improved since then, I believe. Another thing I'm really interested in is this ability to, I forget exactly how it's phrased, but you can mark a node in your scene tree as effectively a wildcard node. So as long as it's got a unique name, you mark it as percentage node. And then in your script, you can just call it percentage text label or whatever it is. And as long as it's a unique name, it doesn't matter where it is in the scene tree, Godot will find it. Now, this does take more resources, so you don't want to do this with everything. But particularly when you're trying to put together an interface and you're constantly shuffling things around, that saves a lot of time. There's also, by the way, and I didn't know this until I saw GD Quest video on it, really cool thing where you hold, I think it's Control-Shift and drag a node into the script, and it just drags it as an on-ready variable.
Oh, that saves a lot of time.
Does it for you. It might be Control drag, it might be Control-Shift drag. Check out GD Quest video. Definitely worth it. So those are 3 things I'm really looking forward to. But the other one is one that I didn't know I wanted, but I do, is shader precaching. So Mikey, you know when we've been playing battle tactics, and we are on the lightning level, and every time the lightning goes the first time, what happens?
We get a small freeze as it loads.
So now you can set the option, and it will speed up some games and slow down others, to calculate all of the shaders before the level starts. So when that light suddenly kicks in for the first time and everything changes, it's already been calculated. So the level will load slower, but once it's running, it just runs.
Yes.
It'll help with particles. It'll help with lighting changes. It'll help with all kinds of stuff.
I mean, just having the stuff preloaded is awesome. I have actually registered it. So I did it on the 16th of June.
Oh, excellent. So does that mean we can start telling people at some point?
I think we should have a landing page, and then we can tell people. Otherwise,
while
it
we're
goes
talking
nowhere.
about Godot 4 Alpha is due to go to code freeze, I believe, in the next couple of days.
Yeah.
With the idea of the first beta version coming out in early September. Want to point out, first beta version is not stable, right? They're telling us don't use this for production. So I will be using it to research and prepare and get everything ready, but it doesn't mean the courses come out in September. Like, if I record it in September, the course may as well be called Why You Shouldn't Have Taken This Course Yet, because we'll have to re-record a bunch of it. And I remember when Godot 3.1 came out, 3.3 came out. did a bunch of stuff in the beta, and then the actual interface changed. And all of the early stuff I did had to be redone because you can't follow that if you've never used the engine before. Like the windows are all in different places.
Yeah. So we've always got to be careful with that, and that's one of the things with teaching any bit of software. Software development these days means, in a lot of cases, things are getting iterated upon very quickly, and names change, or positions change, or icons change, and most students who are taking a course can accept, oh, well, that button's now orange instead of blue. Fine, off we go. Unfortunately,
when an entire window's on the other side of the screen,
yes,
and
when
you've
it's
not used that program before, that can be an issue.
yes, I mean, it's one of the reasons I often get asked, especially with Blender, why do you just use everything default? Why don't you use like all of these
Yeah,
add-ons
I get
turned
that
on?
with Godot.
I'm like, there's a reason. If I have an add-on turned on and I don't tell people it's turned on, then we have a problem. I will get tons of support requests essentially saying, "Oh, what does that window do?" So I always make sure, even my screencast keys, I make sure that, oh, hey guys, this is how I install screencast keys. You might want it on
I
yourself for
always
some
make sure
reason.
I've got Godot in the default colors, in the
Yes,
default
yeah,
window layout, because I would rather use a darker skin myself.
hmm
But when I'm recording, I've got students who have never used this program before, who maybe aren't that familiar with basic game engines, or even possibly with computers. Like they haven't used them that much, but they want to make a game.
yeah.
I want them to learn, and I don't want that to be a barrier. So let's just see. This is what you will see unless you've changed the skin. And if you've changed the skin or your window layout, you know enough to know where everything is. So it's not an issue.
Yes, and when it comes to that, if someone's of an anxious disposition, they want to learn this thing and they're really unsure about their ability to learn, which a lot of people suffer from. Opening it up and it looking different is a horrible feeling for that type of person. They will at that point go, "Oh, it's different. I must have the wrong version," and off they go and they don't learn, which is terrible. So we want to make sure that everybody has as ease of access into things as possible. I mean,
Yeah,
one of the
I want
great
to make it as
things,
easy as possible for people to get what they can out of the course. Like
definitely,
our idea is very, I mean, it's usually called learner centric, but the idea is we want to make it as easy as possible for you guys to fulfill whatever potential you want to be fulfilling in a course. We don't want you to sort of guess what we're doing and all the rest of it.
yeah.
Is
Uh,
there a way to have separate profiles for Blender? One for add-ons, one for default for making tutorials? I can think of one way.
there is one way of doing it. There are actually
Steam
several ways.
and non-Steam.
Yes, that's one possibility. Apart from the app data folder is the same for both. So that wouldn't give you separate
Not if you
add-ons.
force Steam to be using a different version.
That is true, which you might not want to do. So yes, you can have all of the versions of Blender installed on your computer, all with their own app data folder, which is absolutely fine. But one of the problems is making sure that if you've got two Blender 3.3s, how do you make sure that they have separate app data folders? And you can do that, and you can even do it on a portable stick. I think I've got a video on that on my YouTube channel. So I'll go find that in a moment and post that in the chat. One of the simplest versions is to either have two computers, which not everybody can do, but you can have two different users. So I on this
Mhm.
computer here, I have a me and gaming, so my personal profile, and then I have my professional profile. So I simply switch profiles. And again, having the high RAM count allows me, going back to the hardware discussion, allows me to leave one of those open and running and hop between the two without too much of an issue. I don't need to worry because it just fills up my RAM, which I've got, so it can be filled up. But yeah, I would say that either follow the instructions that I will post for you guys in a second, or more simply, make sure you've got two user accounts and just switch between them. But I know that isn't always an option for people. Where just being, I don't want to do that is absolutely fine. So I shall post that in a moment.
It's a fun conversation about fundamental there.
Fundamental, yes. I mean, the fundamentals are so difficult to get across sometimes because there's a lot of shiny stuff that is very distracting.
it's very easy to teach them wrong. It's very easy to assume that other people have base knowledge that they don't. It's very easy to assume you understand the fundamentals as well as you think you do.
One of the great it's difficult as well to keep people engaged when you're talking about fundamentals. If we start talking about actually what's going on with a texture that's a normal versus a texture that's a bump map, conceptually you could go through it very, very simply at a high level. But when you start talking about how it's doing normal calculations, say you wanted to take your knowledge further, then it's difficult to pace a particular video to include that. I can see you smirking.
Well, it's like one of the big obstacles to learning Blender for the very first time is the control system. It takes a while to understand how to move around, how to find things. I still mess up by confusing Control A and Shift A. Like in my brain, they should be reversed. And so one of the obvious things to do is the first section of your course is just the interface, but no one's going to get to the second section.
Yeah, people will literally say, "Oh, this is boring." Well, it is. It's the fundamentals. Right. Yeah, they are right. They're not wrong.
It's a fundamental, but I guess the question there is which fundamental should you be teaching?
Yeah, we try and approach the beginning of a course to get people. It's difficult because different people learn in different ways, which is always a challenge. But we try and make sure there's some sort of project attached to it. So in Blender, if you're moving stuff around, sure, let's learn to move stuff around and make something at the same time. I think approaching it that way is much more user accessible than just learning to move things around. There are certainly multiple ways of learning and multiple curriculum approaches that you can have, and there is the old school way of doing a lot of
ZBrush.
There is the old school way of doing a lot of academic stuff. So you have all the instruction first, and then you put it into practice. It's better to combine the two in general.
I've seen people argue that you should start with the mathematics and the theory. The problem there is if you don't have a practical grounding, that won't stick.
Yeah, I've had the same sort of argument.
Understanding the mathematics in abstract, if you're not already well trained in mathematics, doesn't help you understand it.
No, and ultimately,
I mean, I explained UV texturing to somebody recently by pulling up a cube.
Yep.
Putting a UV texture on it, and then putting the wrong texture on it for a different object, and seeing how it's mapped. Yeah. And it's much easier to explain by having a practical example. Hi, Caboodle.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a challenge, and we also welcome feedback. So if you're going through any of our courses and perhaps it's going too fast for you, reach out. There may be something that we can help out, or just we've mentioned something in a lecture. I had a bit of feedback about an origin, but I hadn't explained origins because the course was set as an intermediate course. Yeah. So I've assumed that you know what moving things is, what rotating things, scaling things. They're all forms of transforms.
Is such a difficult term when you're teaching.
Yes, I mean,
because it means so many different things.
I've had
to explain what's going on with this cat. This cat's been asleep all afternoon. She's usually on my desk or on my lap. And she clearly has just woken up without me in the room and is worried that I wasn't in the house. And now she's very excited.
Well, you are in the house. Let's play. Yes. Focus on the fundamentals of what you're doing, such as 3D wise. Yeah, exactly. When it comes to things like interface and building up a game, starting at the fundamentals is incredibly important, and making sure that you have your control system sorted. Not finalized, but can you control your character? Does the character's movement feel right? Even if it's something as simple as a platformer, there are so many different ways. Game Maker's Toolkit recently did his magnet thing. That was, he actually goes through the process of explaining why he decided on the control system he did, because there are so many different ways you can tell a character to jump.
Coyote this is something I used to teach my theatre tech students and my theatre design students. The wrong decision is the one you didn't make. Now, that doesn't mean that every decision you make is a good one, but it means if you don't think about something and make an active decision, if you just let it happen, you've made the wrong decision.
Yeah. I mean, we have
almost guaranteed.
We are whenever we're designing a game, Jan and I, we sit down and there's probably a week or two of making a base game design document and always accepting that it won't be the same by the time you end. Pages will be torn out, things will be crossed out,
Feature creep will be hit on the
will be
head.
very present. Yeah. But having somewhere to start from is important, and having a direction is important, and making sure that you are comfortable with the fact that something that was a brilliant idea doesn't tie you down and you end up just axing it. It may be a brilliant idea, but not for the game you're making right at the
Or not for the
moment.
course you're making. I mean,
Yeah.
we have to be very careful about the fact that we keep putting it, because I like to make courses with games that you actually want to play. I think it's a much better learning experience,
Yeah.
right? Yes, of course, we could just do Infinite Runner with a block, and you will learn stuff from that. But if you don't want to play it, you're not going to have the same investment. You're not going to try and go the extra mile and customize it, which is where you're really going to shine as a student, right?
Yeah.
Because by making it your own, by investing in it, you
Yeah.
start really understanding the decisions you're making. But the downside with that is it's really easy to think of it as a game and start adding more and more features, which aren't
Yeah.
actually important for the learning journey. You don't need 72 types of NPC. You need one or two.
Yes, repetitiveness is something we really struggle with when producing any course,
Mhm.
because ultimately, game design and many things outside game design are repetitive. You will do the same thing 30, 40, 50 times. There is no that showing you guys around a problem the first time and then providing solutions to various things that can go wrong. Great. Now let's practice that again. Awesome, I've got it. If you start doing it a third and fourth time,
And
it
even then, like the most important thing we're supposed to be teaching is why you're making a decision, why something works.
Yeah.
Like, why is this the right decision for here or the wrong decision for here? If
Yeah.
you understand the why, the what becomes a lot simpler.
Yeah.
But once you do understand the why, we should stop going on about it.
Yeah, I had this sticks in my head to this day. So I was doing a duplication move. So I was pressing Shift and D, and then moving. It was like a roof tile or something along those lines. That was repetitive over there. So I demonstrated. I'm going to duplicate, move it across, duplicate, move it across. I'm going to grab 3 of them now and duplicate those 3 and move them across. So, oh yeah, you can select multiple things, duplicate, and then we're going to do another layer that's offset. So let's duplicate that and move it across, and move it up as well. Okay, brilliant. Now I'm going to speed run the rest of this
Yep.
because I'm going to be doing this now
Clockwise.
for the next, 2 minutes. It's not a big task, but it is very repetitive and so forth. And then of course, some people like that, the fact that they've not had to skip the video or fast forward. And then of course you get people, oh, I wanted to see the full process. I was literally following along with you. And I always try to encourage any student to not just follow along, but actually take the challenge on themselves and actually do the thing without having to follow along verbatim. Because unfortunately, what happens if you follow along a tutorial or any learning journey verbatim and you just copy what's there, you get very good at following along with tutorials and not very good at doing your own thing. I know plenty of people that are fantastic and they show some amazing models, but none of it's their original work. And that's a shame.
Well, again, it's the sort of understanding the why.
Yes. I think there's a big thing about the why you have to do things, well, not have to, but why we are doing things this way and not that way. And that's
that
always a challenge.
links into BB Game Dev's thing about game design is hard. It is. And there are things you can do to practice and get better. And one of them is play a lot of board games and design your prototypes as pen and paper prototypes.
Yeah.
But again, that comes down to, why am I making this decision? Like, why have I put this character here? Why is it this movement system? And for me, it boils down to what's the player experience, which is something I hammer on about all the time. But there are other ways of picturing game design. There are they're perfectly fine ways of picturing game design.
Yeah.
But for me, I find that picturing how do I want the player to feel and then going from there. A great example is a couple of weeks back, Mikey and I played Left 4 Dead 2. I got it years ago for free on the one day it was free for Steam's anniversary.
Me too.
Played it single player once, put it away. None of my friends were playing it. Mikey and I thought, let's play it. And we were terrible.
Well,
I mean, really terrible. We were doing a standard run and gun. and we were just bad. Like
Yeah.
we didn't make it through the first campaign. We played it
Communication is
again
really
this
important in
week,
that game. Yeah.
and we rocked it. Except for one point where we forgot to do this because we realized it's a different kind of game with a different kind of experience. This isn't a Call of Duty game. It's not a run and gun. It's hold this territory, move on to the next territory, hold this territory, move as a group, first line crouch, keep in one block.
And that worked incredibly well. BB Game Dev, I agree with that. Following verbatim first is important because one of the things that so years ago when I'm starting to learn how to code, I used to get really excited and I used to do my own thing and I used to change the code so much that in the next lecture, because I'd go ahead and I'll just try things out.
Yeah.
It wouldn't work anymore because I changed the code so much. So yes, following verbatim first, so you get the whole thing and it's exactly the same as the instructor.
I mean, this is why in Discovering Godot, the
tinkering.
first thing I tried to teach is what is a variable, what is a function, what is an array. Because once you've got those, you can play, but you need those.
Yes. Yeah, it's one of those fundamentals. I really, really want to do like an ABCs of coding and not even talk about coding, but the actual concept of what it is in real life. I don't know how it's going to work yet, but everybody...
I know how. We dress one of us up as an angry genie.
Well volunteered there, yeah. Thank you.
For those of you who don't know, I constantly refer to coding as dealing with a grumpy genie because you get exactly what you asked for, but not what you wanted.
Oh man, it's going to turn into a really bad 90s style
skit,
kids.
Yeah. But it's very much that. It's much more an exercise in formal logic. You think what you've said is this, but actually you've let in all of this error.
I like graphics. That's why I like Blender and everything. And graphical design when it comes to your code flow. If you write it as a flow chart and then refer your code back to the flow chart to make sure it makes sense, is one way of tackling that approach. And we all do coding every day. If in the morning you make yourself a cup of coffee, cup of tea, or a breakfast, or whether it's toast or whether it's cereal, you follow a prescribed method. You follow an algorithm to make your breakfast, whatever it is, or your your drink. And so you could actually write that in code. What do? Well, if the cup is empty, which it probably is, you need to pour water in it. And you can start thinking about at what level of abstraction. Because at some point you would create a function called make tea. You wouldn't dive in and put all of the details in at one level. You'd start to go up a level of abstraction and just say, what are the headlines of what I'm doing today? And I think that sort of thing might help out newcomers. I think it would have helped out me. So it's something that I do want to have a look at and see if I can make it so it's
I remember
not too
months
noddy.
ago when you and I went to a government office and explaining what our company did, and the woman behind the desk was just like, I could never do coding. I mean, I learned it, and if I learn it, you can.
Yeah.
And we just gave her the basic, this is a function, this is a variable, this is how you make a cup of tea.
Yeah. And she was like, oh, I get it. Yeah. Nested if statements.
Nested if statements. Oh, unbroken while statements.
Unbroken while statements.
While true.
It's just a game loop.
Yep.
I have just noticed that we've gone over the hour and we're still rambling away as we always do. This is a great time if you've got any questions over what we've been through, or if you've got any questions that we haven't gone through, or as Jan likes to say, take it away.
I drive up. No. If you've got any questions, concerns, thoughts, interpretive dances, jingles, or poems, I did it wrong. Wife dot make tea.
Only
if divorce count is greater or equal than 2, self make tea.
Yeah, I would say that was probably the safest answer to that question.
Yeah.
Yes. Ask nicely.
Kicking in.
Yes, I think you need to put ask nicely in within the function call.
I don't know. I've never enjoyed other people doing stuff for me.
Mr. Independent.
No, it's not even that. I feel bad being the kind of person who expects everyone to bring me things.
Okay.
I remember when I first moved to New York, and I was working in finance, and I've been there like 2 days. and I'm at my computer doing some data editing for a corporate finance company. And a guy came in and knelt at my feet and started cleaning my shoes. I'm just like,
That is a bit weird. I'll probably have the same reaction.
it's a bit weird, especially when you come from a country that has a class system, right? Like, I don't want a servant. And the rest of the office is just like, no, it's just Miguel. He comes around once a week and shines everyone's shoes. Like, no, he doesn't. I will shine my shoes.
That's what I've never heard of that. That's
where do I find inspiration to make new courses? It's usually behind the couch. I think this is probably slightly different for both of us.
Yep.
Mikey, where do you find inspiration?
So there are two things. There's a joke that goes along like anyway. So I think there are two main sort of inspirations that will sort of like be the genesis of a course. One of them is you guys. You say, "Oh, we want to learn X," and I'm like, "That sounds interesting. Let's go," and off we go. So that's one of them is external, and the other one is internal, where I go, "Oh, this is really cool. I want everybody to know about this. I think this is going to help people out." So it's one of the reasons why in sort of all of my recent Blender stuff, there's a little bit about, hey, if you use a bit of scripting here, we can speed up our workflow massively. Instead of this taking you half an hour to export all of your assets, let's spend that half an hour writing a little script that does it for us. Look at that. Then if you need to make a change to your assets and re-export them, you click a button, it's done. I mean, that sort of thing for me, that's a great example. One of the most recent ones that I can pull out, where it's that this is really helpful. How can I help other people understand how this is put together? Because obviously I can give you that bit of code and explain how it works. That's what we've done with the Mixamo exporter script on the website. But when it comes to actually being able to produce that, if you know the why and the how of how to do it, you can change it. So let's say you don't want a GLTF, you'd now understand how to switch all of that out, so you're exporting as an OBJ or an FBX. You'd have the prerequisite knowledge in order to do that, and I think that's really, really important. And
yeah, and typically what happens with me is I'll be playing around in Godot with a technique I don't know, or trying to make a thing like, can I make a level out of hexagons that change height based on a height map? You know, something silly like that. Yeah. And, or, you know, how would I make a very simple Bomberman? So I'll play with different techniques and try and move the NPCs. And the next thing you know, we've got a fun game. And then we have the conversation, is this a course or is this a game?
Yeah.
And usually it's a course. So with the God of War Action RPG, for example, as a course, it was playing around with the assets we made to make 3D mazes procedurally.
And it
once
just
that's
grew
done,
from
playing
that,
with
didn't
different
it?
movement systems, and it just grew.
Yeah.
And it's a very organic growth. And the problem you've got there is you need to take a step back and think, what am I teaching? Like, what's the final goal?
Yes.
Because traditionally, when you make a curriculum, at least the way I was taught, you start with the end goal and work backwards. Like, what do they need to be able to do at the end? What happens just before that and all the way back? If I'm making a big course, like with Discovering Godot, I've got an idea that I want to start very, very simple. Maybe not even in 2D, maybe just like an interface game, which is why we did Looney Lips, right? It's you're just writing words in because you need to understand variables and functions and input. And, you know, a couple of things like conditionals. From there, we can go into a very simple 2D game. Then I was messing around and started making a fun little stealth system. So, okay, we've got stealth, we've got basic NPCs, we've got Heistmeisters.
Yeah.
And from there, we start going to 3D. We've got, you know, the game that I made with Mikey the very first time we met in 4 hours. We've got Cube Kickabout, which is still a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So yeah, with me, it's usually playing with a technique and then letting it develop into something fun. And once it becomes fun, I can turn it into a course. If it's not fun, I don't want to.
So one of the things
I don't want to, I don't think you guys want to.
So one of the things you said there about you know how you get to the end goal. I was talking about it earlier as well. When you've got your points in the course, your major milestones that you want to hit. I have also approached something from a more meandering approach, and it can work out incredibly well because it ends up being a very organic journey, and
Yep.
you discover problems as you're going, and it's a very real experience. However, you've got to be very aware that if you end up going down dead ends, you're going to cause you and your students at some point a load of issues. Some dead ends are absolutely fine, especially if they're
Also, very
signposted.
easy to miss something crucial.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, it's
it,
very easy to not teach something. I'm getting some lag here, so that's why I keep talking
yeah,
over you. I'm sorry.
yeah. The
Um,
As you start going down those dead ends, you essentially, if they're not signposted dead ends, you know, hold on a minute, we're going to experiment here. Let's save our file and see if this works. Okay, it didn't work in this case, but it's a useful tool to learn. Let's move on. This is probably the solution. Yes, it is. Off we go. If you have too many of those moments, unfortunately, despite it being part of the experience, it can come across to students as you don't know what you're doing. Whereas, in fact, part of problem solving
mm.
is trying solutions that don't work. I think a course that doesn't have
Or
any
even
problems.
because I remember this happened once too many times in one of my courses,
Yeah.
and students were getting really frustrated. If this isn't the solution, why are you teaching it to me?
Mm.
And I get that.
Yeah.
Sometimes there is value in saying, "Oh, we've made a mistake. Let's go back and fix it." But
Yeah.
sometimes too many of those back to back just feel like I'm trolling you.
Yeah. Oh, let's not do that. Let's do this. Yeah. It's a very balanced approach that you have to take when it comes to that. And I've had lots of feedback about mistakes and making. I think I've hit the right balance between oops and a lot of mine are planned. So it's a very easy get out.
Mm.
Um, but they're only planned because as you're
I
running
mean,
through,
it
you make that
also helps
mistake.
to have the fully finished prototype before you go in, and then
Yeah.
make notes in your code as to where the mistake was, why you've had to write it this way, the little gotchas that can get you, so that then when you're teaching it, you can see them. And there were a couple of times where I deliberately made mistakes, or at least signpost mistakes. A great example of this was in Godot Getaway.
Yeah.
Where because we talked about, shall we go through the mistake and let them make it too, and then go back and rewrite it? And you pointed out they're not going to enjoy that journey. So instead, I showed you what will happen if we just use translation over the network with physics objects, which is the server can move the ball, the client can't.
Yeah.
And then I explain why. And then we go into, so here's how we're solving it. So rather than you having to do it, just demonstrate it.
Yes.
But really, to answer the question is, well, it depends on the mistake. Because a lot of my mistakes are typos, especially as I get older and I get more arthritis in my fingers. And my brain thinks that my fingers are as fluid as they are. And then I look at what I've typed and it's just wrong.
So it's challenging. Yeah. In terms of mistakes, there are two classes of mistakes. There might be more. I'm gonna nail it down now at two, and then say that the third one is so that there's a mistake where you go and make a verbal or screen error or a typo, and those can just be edited out. Those they serve no value. They serve no learning value. And then there's the mistakes where
or comedic value, which there is reason to put into a course.
I'm human. I'm going to make mistakes. Here you go. But then
I'm
there's
gonna
the
keep
other
you
mistake.
engaged by being real. Like,
Totally. But then you get the other type of mistake, which is okay. So we started this journey, and this has happened. How do we solve this particular problem? Whether or not you've accidentally turned on a great one is I think Shift and Z is X-ray mode. It's right next to Control and Z. So some people accidentally have hit Shift at the same time, and then everything's all like wireframe. I mean, that's
or you
that's a
think
great
you press
learning
G
experience.
and then you press Z and everything vanishes.
H, yeah. If you press H next to G, it's like, where's all my stuff gone? And if you've done this, you just need to press. Yeah.
Sometimes I will be recording and it just doesn't work, and it worked fine in the prototype. It's just not working, and it will take me half an hour to figure it out.
Sorry,
and I'll realize I've just put like the wrong variable in or something like that.
Yeah.
But in those cases, I will either redo the video from scratch or just cut that half an hour, because I mean, depending on where the mistake was.
Yeah.
Or I might go, Jan from the future here, I've just realized I did this. And I
Yeah.
might go back and edit. There's a mistake coming, just to let you know. Because it's important to know what the mistake is.
Yes.
But it's also important not to watch me going, oh, why? For half an hour. Like,
and you know, sometimes that's one of the great things about the live streams. So there won't be a stream next week. I'm actually away. But then the week after, Jan's going to be doing a Godot stream, and then I'll be doing a Blender stream the week after that.
Yep.
They're all scheduled in already, so they should be on the channel, which is great. But one of the things, if you want to see us be real, join in one of those streams. My texture one last week where I was like, is this the way that I remember? When you've not touched part of a program in a while, you're like, yeah, sure. I mean, it's a great learning opportunity for me as it is anybody else.
Yep.
But it's one of those things. It's real, and suddenly something doesn't work, and you get to see the same frustrations that you have yourself when you're trying to use a bit of software. I'm going to make this the last question because I've got to go in 4 minutes. BB Game Dev. By the way, I've never asked why Godot or Godot or Godot.
I got into Godot the pretty traditional way. I was watching a video on YouTube called I Think I'm a Bunny, in which a 7-year-old girl is being serenaded by a puppet monster who goes, you know what? I think I'm a bunny. You're not a bunny. I think I'm a bunny. You're not a bunny. I think I'm a bunny. I think I'm a bunny. I think I'm a bunny. No, you're not. I think I'm a bunny. Please stop saying that. And it just made me laugh and laugh and laugh. And at the end of the video,
I'm sampling that, by the way.
Yep, great. At the end of the video, the YouTube algorithm said, you might enjoy this video about Godot by someone called Happy Cat. And, you know, I come from a drama background. Waiting for Godot is one of my favorite plays. I like Godot.
Mm-hmm.
I like being happy. I like cats. Yeah. Let's watch it. And it turned out to be about a game engine I'd never heard of. So then I thought, I wonder if I can make a video game having no coding experience about a purple bunny.
Yeah.
So I did a little bit of searching, and I found some videos by someone called Heartbeast. I'm kidding. I remember his name. Ben Anderson is a great guy. You should definitely check out his stuff. And taught myself just enough to sort of get by, and then realized, oh, this is actually a really cool engine. I made a bunch of mistakes, which I then had to go back and correct. But just as a sort of quick thing, that's why. So I got into Godot because theater. And
yeah,
maybe I'm a special kind of bunny. Please stop saying it.
But yeah, that's an absolutely awesome origin story for the.
And it's a great song, and you should definitely watch it.
We should do something with a bunny in it in the new course. Excellent.
Yeah, no one expects that answer. As to why I stick with Godot, I had actually tried Unity in the past, and it just didn't click. Like my brain was not able to understand the fundamentals behind it, so I could follow the tutorial, but I couldn't make anything afterwards. I'd actually tried a Unity tutorial a little bit beforehand, and it just my mind wasn't meshing with it. But the first time I tried Godot, it just clicked. That doesn't mean it's the perfect engine for everybody. It doesn't mean it's a superior engine to Unity or Unreal. I think they're all great engines. I think there are other great engines. But this is the one that I'm most comfortable with, and I know how to make it work. Like, I can go in and find interesting solutions. The node system makes perfect sense to me. The instancing system makes perfect sense to me. I understand, especially as I go on, like the way that node types inherit from other node types. So yeah, it just kind of clicks. I am not someone who will stand here and tell you it's the best game engine. It's the one that's best for me because it fits my thinking. And the types of game I make are very much directed by the fact that I'm comfortable with the engine. Like if I was making a large-scale multiplayer shooter with high-fidelity graphics, I should be with Unreal. Like that's what that engine does best, and that's what I should be using. So I tend not to make those. I don't play shooters much anyway, so no big deal.
I think it's fair to say
go
that
check out that video. I think I'm a bunny.
I think it's fair to say that Godot is one of probably the top three. You've obviously got Godot, Unreal, and Unity. One thing that Godot does have to its strength is it has a proper 2D engine, whereas the others
Yeah.
they fake the 2D-ness, which is just the way that they're set up. If you're making a first-person shooter, as Jan said, then probably Unreal is a good place to start. If you're making a mobile game, then maybe have a look at Unity. If it's your first experience with the game engine, then Godot's a great starting point because its syntax and the way that GD script itself is
I
written.
mean, Unity got into a lot of strife recently with some of the decisions they made.
Oh,
and then
yes.
people started saying that games were bad because they're made in Unity, and that is frankly nonsense.
Yeah.
Unity is an absolutely fine engine, and after a certain point, it doesn't really matter what kind of engine you're using.
No, it's
if
a
the
tool.
values are the same.
Yeah, it's
Like,
a tool.
I can usually recognize an Unreal game because of the lighting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, ultimately, all of these bits of software, Blender's an absolutely phenomenal tool. It's free, which is great because the barrier to entry for anybody to try it it's there. Maya is an absolutely wonderful tool, and the only way of getting it for free at the moment, I believe, is to have an educational license. So you already have to have usually an educational email address, which already puts you on the back foot because, well, I just wanted to pick it up and learn it. I think what Houdini have done, I absolutely love Houdini. What they've done with their apprentice license is, I think it's apprentice. I might have that wrong, but there is a free tier. Now you can't export from it, and everything's watermarked. That's absolutely fine because that gives everybody the opportunity to learn the bit of software and see whether or not they like it or not. And as Jan was saying about Godot, some people will gel with an engine more than another engine, and it's part of it's just trying it
I know
out.
plenty of people who just gel with Unreal or gel with
Yeah.
Unity, and it suits their way of working and thinking. I think that's wonderful. I am somebody who very much believes that it should be the right decision for you. In the same way that I hate watching sport, I just hate it. I hate football. I hate cricket. I hate baseball. I hate kabaddi. I hate the Olympics.
Hey, whoa! Our
But I love
subscriber
that other
count
people
is
love
just
them.
dropping down.
I love that other people love them.
Yeah.
That doesn't have to be for me. In the same way that I love industrial metal, you don't have to. That's fine. You know, I don't like jazz, but I'm fine that you do. It doesn't have to be my way is the best way.
Yeah.
There is no perfect Pepsi. There are only perfect Pepsis, as Michael Gladwell said.
Baby, yeah.
Once you start being.
What about snooker?
Yes. What about snooker?
And that's all we got time for, folks. Before we lose all the snooker players. Snooker players. Caffeine's wearing off.
Thank you for joining us, everybody.
Yep.
I hope you enjoyed the chat. I certainly did.
Yes. And we will see you not next week, but the week off.
Nope.
The week after.
Yes.
So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.
Bye. Present.
Hold on.
Present.
I got it.